Good day. Hey, in a few slides, my tie is suddenly going to change. I had to re-record the first few slides because for some reason the recording software decided that it was going to stop recording. So I want to talk about difficult cases today, and difficult cases run the gamut. It can be a case where you can't figure out what's going on with the child. It could be a case where you've got divorced parents and one of them is refusing to participate in the evaluation. It could be a case where the kid doesn't qualify and he or she is still struggling in school. So what are you going to do? What services do they need? But for today, we're primarily going to focus on those difficult cases where the parent is disagreeing with the outcome of the psychoed or the IEP team agreement. The parent has enlisted the help of an advocate or a parent friend, or as they're sometimes called, a non-attorney representative or an attorney. And those are truly your most difficult cases. So let's stick to the sort of the legal side of the difficult cases as we go forward. Definition. Okay, well, like we talked about with divorced parents, when they disagree on qualifications, typically what you get is one parent pushing for the IEP, filling out all the paperwork, the other parent saying, no, my child is not special education, I'm not going to fill out anything. And then they both show up to the meeting. And because your psychoeducational report does not have input from both, it's really not legally compliant. It might be legally compliant, but it's definitely not legally defensible. And so one of the parents will challenge your psychoeducational report. And at the very least, you're going to end up with an IEE, an independent educational evaluation, which we're going to go into depth here in a few minutes. Not finding a clear qualification is definitely a problem. When an SST team has sent a student your way, they did so for a reason. Now, just because they're not meeting one of the criteria under SLD doesn't mean that you shouldn't look into OHI, autism, emotionally disturbed. And remember, the emotionally disturbed category has 5 subcategories, and it's not always just behavior. So refresh yourself with those. Also remember the cognitive abilities of, under the SLD qualification, the specific learning disability qualifications, the cognitive ability of perception, of association, and the others. Those are very rarely used and rarely understood. We'll do a presentation on them here in a little while, but they're usually not challenged either if you need to use one of them to get a kid the services he or she needs. The typical aggressive attorney or advocate definitely makes for a difficult case. They don't have to be aggressive, or they don't have to be aggressive, but they do have to show the parent that they're earning their pay, because most school districts do not pay for advocates, and the attorney gets paid only on the percentage of the complaints that they win. So it does come out to be an aggressive relationship sometimes. A parental lawsuit filed with the Office of Administrative Hearing in California, that's one thing. And that's rough. That will make a difficult case. The worst case scenario is when they file with OCR, the Office of Civil Rights, because now they're saying you're violating their rights under ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act. And if OCR gets involved, it's a long, drawn-out process. You're usually looking at a 5-year micromanaging type of situation from OCR. I mean, every time you qualify a kid, say under OHI, and let's just say the kid is Hispanic, well, OCR is going to step in and take a look at the percentage of kids in your district that are Hispanic, the percentage of kids in your district qualified under OHI that are Hispanic, and if the numbers aren't proportional, you've got a problem, and they're going to challenge your qualification of that child. OCR can be quite a learning opportunity for an entire district. Okay, probably the best way to handle difficult cases is to not get involved with them, to prevent them. So the first thing we're going to do is go through a couple of prevention techniques. Number one, SST referrals are made for a reason. Don't dismiss these just because you can't find how our kid qualifies and you want to go with a DNQ. That's fine. But that DNQ psychoeducational report should be one of the most difficult ones you write. And don't, whatever you do, don't get on board with teachers or principals and label the kid as lazy or unmotivated. Now, on the surface, that might be true, but there's a reason for that. Are they too far down the Maslow scale? At home, are the parents not involved and they're having to raise their siblings? Are they just so lost that they're not getting it? Are they competing with very bright older siblings who have always achieved without effort? And they can't match that, so they've given up. If you're going to talk about laziness or unmotivation, don't use those terms. Describe the behavior. So instead of saying that Johnny is lazy, say that when Johnny comes into his English class, he is not prepared. He does not bring a pencil, paper. He puts his head down on his desk. He will not listen to the lecture. He will not engage in the classroom. He seems to have no desire to develop his reading comprehension skills, as evident by the fact that no homework is completed and classwork is really difficult to get out of Johnny. You see how you're describing the principles commonly associated with laziness or unmotivation, but you're not labeling them, and that's a huge difference. Describing the behavior is okay, labeling it, not okay. Access in all areas of disabilities. Now, the actual law says that we assess in all areas of suspected disability, but that threshold for suspecting is very low. Okay, you could give the CAS and the student scores an 88 on the attention profile section. That's just inside the below average range. Now, I have another presentation where I justify using 90 to 110 as average. I know a lot of districts go 85 to 115. That's not correct. So 88 is just inside that below average range. You might say, you know, we got that's so close, I'm not even going to look at attention processing as a possibility. He might have just been having a bad day. But an attorney will jump on that. A teacher comment, just out of the blue, that you have in your report says that Johnny appears to be distracted in class. Now you're looking at assessing for ADHD, assessing for attention processing, and we're going to talk about the difference in a little bit. Assessing for OHI, other health impaired. This idea that to qualify under other health impaired, you must have a medical note or diagnosis is incorrect. IDEA requires us to assess in all areas of suspected disability as outlined in IDEA, and so it also authorizes us to assess in those areas. Not to make medical diagnoses, no. Not even to make DSM-5 diagnoses, no. But we can definitely report behaviors consistent with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. That would be consistent with our mandate. What we can't do is say that Johnny is showing these behaviors, document it, and then say, but he has no diagnosis, so we can't qualify him. That is indefensible. Okay. Prevention also includes communication. Communicating with the parent, the teachers, the principals, everybody, making sure everybody's on the same side, making sure that the principal and the teachers know how to describe behavior instead of labeling it, making sure that they know how to communicate with the parent and that they are regularly doing so. For initials, remember, and we talked about this a couple times, but I cannot stress it enough, the student demonstrated a need. I've seen a lot of student study teams refer students for special education assessments, and sometimes the referrals are not that great. But I tell you, the SST teams used all the tools they had. Now, they may not have had a lot of tools. They may not have been as well trained as I would have liked. But they did not refer the student just to see me do another assessment. They had a reason. The home environment. The home environment cannot rule out qualification. What do we mean by that? First of all, remember, when it comes to home environment and attendance, you're only looking at that affecting qualification under specific learning disability. It does not directly affect qualifications under other health impaired or emotionally disturbed or intellectual disability or autism, right? The common areas we're assessing for. So let's say you have a clear auditory processing disability, but at home, Jill gets no support for education. Homework is not stressed or even encouraged. The family likes to go out on these outings and these all-terrain vehicle trips to the desert like every afternoon, and there's no time to do homework because everybody's having too much fun. That does not rule out the impact of the auditory processing on Jill's academic progress. Homework these days is becoming having less and less of an impact on grades anyway. So yeah, the home environment might not be what you want, but once you have found a disability, a processing deficit, then home environment carries a lot less weight. All right, I'm going to go switch ties real quick. Thank you. Let's get it restarted. I'll have to patch these together. Okay. Attendance. Okay. Don't hang your hat on poor attendance as a reason a child does not qualify. You're going to want to rule out poor attendance as the major factor. And about the only way you can do that is to ask the parent to get the child to school every day for a couple of months and see if the grades improve. Now, if you can't do that, you do not have the research to say that the delay is due to poor attendance. And remember, attendance and home environment only affects qualification under specific learning disability. It does not impact any of the other 12 qualifying categories. So if you're looking at ED or OHI, you can pull up attendance, and you should put it in your report, but it is not a qualification to rule out. It would not prevent qualifying. Triennial. In order to keep your triennials intact and to make your triennials, legally compliant, know what standard score growth looks like and know how to explain it to the parent and advocates. Occasionally they need reminding. So if Johnny had a standard score, let's say you gave him a full scale IQ of 95, and let's say they had let's do academics. Let's say they had a reading comprehension standard score of 95 3 years ago, and during your triennial they have a reading comprehension standard score of 95. A parent or an advocate might claim that they're making no growth because the score has stayed the same. And they will do this. They'll misunderstand standard scores. You know that a 95 3 years ago under reading comprehension was much easier to get than it is 3 years later. So the same standard score between two triennials means the child has made 3 years worth of growth over 3 years. That's perfect. That's what you want to see. Make sure the parents understand that. And you almost have to point it out at every triennial meeting, because the parent's going to go home and look at those standard scores and pull up that old psychoed and say, my son's not making any growth at all. My daughter's not making any growth. A standard score that of reading on a reading comprehension test of 95 3 years ago, and now they're getting a 91. That doesn't show that they're not learning. They learned at almost three. They learned almost 3 years worth of growth over 3 years. That's what they made, almost. But they have a disability. They have a processing disability. They have whatever, attention deficit. We wouldn't really expect them to maintain that same standard score 3 years later, unless our interventions are just spot on and perfect, and they were right to begin with. You don't want a significant fall. You may see a significant growth, and if you do see a significant drop in standard scores, you're going to want to do a few more testing, a few more assessments to figure out why and what's going on. You're going to want to revise the services and the accommodations because something's not working. Consider all prior assessments. If you're going into what you know is a difficult case, guys, you got to look at every IEP, every addendum, every report card, every psychoeducational report, any documents that the attorney and the parent may get their hands on. Because they're going to look at all of it. And in my book, I talk about, and it's easier to do this than you may think. Okay, first of all, if an attorney or an advocate becomes involved, the first thing that they're going to do is a records request. A records request means that the district has about 5 days, it has 5 days, to send the attorney or the advocate every page from the student's CUME folder, from the special ed folder, anything with the student's name on it that's being kept in a place of records.
Is that 5 calendar days or 5 business days?
It's 5 calendar days. When we talk about, and that's a good question, when we talk about calendar days, there's only one time calendar days are used in special education law. Does anybody know what time that is? The 10 days for the manifestation determination is, did I say that right? The 10 days for manifestation determination says 10 school days. That's the only place school days is used in IDEA. So every other timeline is calendar days. Districts have 5 calendar days to respond to the parent's request for documents. Now, I take all those records if I know I've got a difficult case, and I'll scan them in. You can today copiers will do this. Now, your copier is going to be set to scan in at about 200 dots per inch. You want to up that to about 400. Makes the file a little bit larger, but then when you get it, you can run OCR on it, optical character recognition. And I just upload it to Adobe Acrobat, run optical character recognition, then I can search the document for keywords. And what I'm searching is their CUME and their special ed folder, everything, all the report cards, everything. Now I'll do this as an IEE on cases. If I've got a kid, I'm trying to make a case for ED, I'm going to look for behavior. I'm going to look for the word fighting. I'm going to look for just any key words throughout all these documents. And it's amazing how quickly and how much data you can find doing that. And then that's just supporting evidence that overwhelms any opposition in the IEP team. All right, for triennials, you'll also want to consider grades. Grades are as important a part of academic progress as anything else. Because the law says the child must make educational progress and that we must consider the impact of the disability on education, not academics. So academics is a part of education, but academics is not the whole of education. Education includes that social emotional growth piece. It includes the preparation for getting out into the workplace. A kid who's not doing their homework, who's getting F's, is not ready to go into the workplace. So they're not ready to exit. And most of the time on a triannual, most of the time, your problems are going to be when you want to exit a kid. And I'm not saying don't exit them. No, I've exited plenty of kids, but you got to make sure the whole team's supporting you on this. Taking away special education services, no matter how good the try looks, is not a hill most districts want to die on. So they're going to just continue services. The best way to do this, if you know a kid probably does not need services anymore, they're doing really well, is to start a fading program. And at the end, you start attending every annual. And at every annual, you reduce services until you're just really doing a consultation between the SAI teachers and the teacher, the SAI teacher and the parents. And you're letting the parents see the child sort of pick themselves up and move on without support.
Dr. Turner, I have a question.
Yes.
We just recently exited 2 kids. One was he hadn't taken special education for a year. Would that be, or directive service classes for a year, would that be something that would be considered as well? And the second question
Sure.
is, we also just recently exited another kid who has brittle bone. We exited her twin brother a year ago, and we just exited her like a week ago, but she hasn't been doing her classwork. So would that be an issue? We were planning on exiting her anyways, but then she's, since COVID began, she has stopped turning in her work and things like that. So what would you recommend in those cases?
I would be the second case with the brittle bone, I would have probably never exited that kid. Does she not need adaptive PE at all?
Well, they moved her from special ed to a 504 to give her transportation.
Okay.
And I think she finished her PE requirements already. She's in high school.
Okay. But they moved her to a 504 plan. That's good. Now she's not doing her work. It wouldn't take much to convince a jury or a judge that there's a correlation there.
So during this time, like while we are on stay-at-home orders, it would have probably been wiser for the school district not to exit her, even though the plan was to exit her. Is that correct?
Yeah. This is a really weird time right now. So if this had not happened and she had continued to work in the classroom and do her work, you wouldn't have a problem. And this is where special education is not fair. It's really there to protect. The special education law is written for parents. And it's written to give parents the ultimate power to get the services they want for their child. So in this case, COVID has set you up to fail. If the parent, although they agreed, and they probably signed the IEP, they can still, for the next 2 years, come back and demand compensatory education if she does not start working. And it's not anything you did wrong. And the fact that you moved her to a 504 plan will probably make a big difference. But if you had completely exited her, you wouldn't have a case, and it wasn't anything you did wrong. And guys, that's probably the one takeaway I want you to take away today. You're going to lose cases, and you're going to do everything right, and you're going to lose cases. It happens, and the districts know it, the directors know it, the superintendents know it. This is not a law that was written to protect schools, not at all. Lorraine, does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you very much. I was a little bit concerned about that.
Yeah. Don't be concerned, okay? You made the best decision you could at the meeting, and the parents agreed, right? They signed the IEP.
Yes.
Okay. Just know that the best thing to do now might be to have the special education teacher and yourself, or the school psychologist, whoever wants to do it, reach out to the parents. Make sure those parents feel supported. Provide some help. Offer to modify the work and modify the 504 plan. But if you just, the problem with the 504 plan is that typically they're not implemented well. They almost require the special education teacher guidance to especially if there's any sort of academic modification. I would imagine they didn't put any academic modification in for this kid.
That is correct.
Yeah.
She is actually a very smart student, AP classes left and right. Yeah.
Oh, wow. And she's not doing any work?
Well, for 2 of her classes, I think, like 3 out of 5 classes she's doing, but she's not doing all of her work in all of her classes.
Yeah. Okay. I would reach out and provide some help. Make sure the parents have someone they can talk to and somebody's giving them some good advice. Otherwise, it's going to hang over the school for the next 2 years. And anything you do, document.
Gotcha.
Because you're going to need it in a court of law.
Gotcha. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome. Now, guys, let's ask the question: can a special education student fail a course? We're done with our initials, and we did a quick review on the triannuals, some prevention stuff. We got more prevention stuff coming up. But let's just stop and think for a minute. You've got a kid in special education, and they are failing a course. Is that allowed? Your answer to that question will determine how many fair hearings you go to. If we presume, and I just use that word because I didn't want to say assume, that the qualification category is correct, the interventions fit the child's needs, and they're being implemented with fidelity, the accommodations are perfect, and the services are spot on, and they're being delivered with only, just the occasional interruption, but nothing major. If all of that is correct, a special education student cannot fail. And that must be your answer. It must be your attitude. And it's the hardest thing in the world to get across to high school teachers. Middle school teachers, they get a little resistant. The elementary school teachers are right there with you. They know this kids want to learn. Middle school, well, kids get a little crazy, but the teachers are willing to go up and beyond. High school, it's all on the kid. And if the kid fails, it's their fault. Not if they're in special education. They cannot fail. Just adopt that motto, because any lawyer or attorney can prove it in a court of law. Real easy. Okay. Some more prevention. Let's look at the IEP documentation. Now, guys, we did a presentation a few days ago on Ed Benefit Review. So when you're looking at the IEP documentation, you want to make sure you're sitting in a triannual meeting. You want to make sure that the present levels clearly show growth. Not just that they show what the child can do, but that the special education teacher has went back to the prior IEP, referenced that description back then, and show in the current present levels how the child has grown. So there's a direct correlation between last year's present levels and this year's present levels. Nobody can argue with that. A few pages after the present levels page, there's usually the question, does the child's behavior impact education? If you're qualifying a kid under OHI or ED, you'd better say yes. There's just no way not to most of the time. But those are the rare circumstances. Now, if you're qualifying a kid under SLD with attention processing disorder, you should probably say the behavior is impacting education. Let's take a side note here and talk about the difference between ADHD and attention processing. So attention processing is one of the areas of disability that a child can qualify under for SLD. Attention processing is not, let me back up. An attention processing disorder is not the same thing as ADHD. Okay? You may have, if you're fortunate enough, you've heard the saying that ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, means that the child cannot not focus. The double negative is there, and it's very important to emphasize the fact that the child is focusing on everything. And because they're focusing on everything, they're constantly distracted, so they can't focus on anything. Your ADHD kid is a kid who is trying to take notes and pay attention to the teacher, but every time somebody moves over here, they get distracted. Every time the clock ticks up there, they hear it. Everything that goes on in the classroom comes into their brain with the same intensity as if somebody had ran into the classroom yelling fire. Now you know yourself, no matter how engrossed you are in this presentation right now, if somebody walks into your house and says the house is on fire, you're probably going to get up and leave, and you're going to hear them. Well, imagine if everything going on around you right now came into your awareness with that same level of intensity. That's ADHD. The child cannot not pay attention. Attention processing deficit means the child cannot pay attention. See the difference? Under ideal circumstances, your ADHD kid could probably focus for half an hour or 45 minutes. Under ideal circumstances, your attention processing deficit kid cannot focus. They just don't have that ability. Maybe for 5 minutes, but that's what attention processing is. So if you're going to qualify under SLD for attention processing, you're going to have an impact on behavior. Is going to have an impact. Okay. This is one of the things I always see attorneys and advocates pointing to. Okay, Jill has 17 referrals to the office, but the IEP team says that the behavior isn't impacting her education. What's going on? We want an IEE. We want compensatory education, and they get it. There's also the question on the IEP, diploma versus certificate track. A certificate track means the child is not going to get a diploma. Their graduation criteria is going to be based on progress on goals, not the standard curriculum, not the Common Core. They're not going to meet the A through G requirements for UC or Cal States. They're not going to meet the district requirements for graduation. We're going to give them a certificate of attendance, and they're going to walk at graduation just like every other kid. Nobody's going to know they're not getting a diploma, but it won't be a diploma. This is a decision that needs to be made early. It needs to be made in middle school. It's not required to be made until about 8th grade, but you want it early. These kids are in SDC classes. These kids have their classwork modified so much that they're not accessing Common Core. Those kids, you just need to level with the parents early on. And if the parents disagree with you, this is not a topic that the district will take to fair hearing. So just note in the notes of the IEP that the district recommended certificate track for Johnny. The parents disagree and would like to continue diploma track. And you can do that up until about the end of maybe 9th grade. And starting around 9th grade, around the end of 9th grade, you need to have that diploma certificate battle worked out with the parent. And you need, if they are certificate bound, the parent needs to own it, and it needs to be documented correctly in the IEP. And about 9th grade is when the district should be taking the parent to fair hearing if they don't agree with the school's assessment of diploma versus certificate. Timelines. Timelines are an area that will always get us in trouble. This year, they've implemented a new code for late IEPs. I don't know exactly what it says. I just know it's code 60. So in SACE, when we're doing our late IEPs, once school resumes, and we're probably going to start holding those IEPs over the summer. I would encourage your districts to do the same. Once we're able to meet again, they're going to be late, and we've been told by the state you're going to indicate the reason they're late is code 60. Okay, this is like a one-time offer. So one-time get out of jail free card that comes with attachments. When I say get out of jail free card, any attorney or advocate could still demand compensatory education. They could still demand an IEE. They can still demand additional services. And a lot will. And a lot of districts will be going back and making up all these service minutes. Although the parent signed a letter saying they know the kid's on independent study and they know that the services will be reduced and the kid has not been in the classroom, they're still going to be owed compensatory education. Remember, IDEA is not there to protect the schools. It's there to protect the parent. You want to document all your delays. So if you send a survey out to the parent and they don't get it back to you, if you've got an SAI teacher who can't get a kid assessed and you're late on a triennial because of that, first, have documentation, but secondly, realize it's your fault. That's, again, just the way it works. So if I can't get documents from a parent, then I'm going to go back and look at my prior IEPs, and I'm going to pull parent input from there. And where it says parent input on my IEP, I'm going to document every time I sent out the Woodcock-Johnson parent checklist. How many times did I mail it out? How many times did I fax it? How many times did I hand it to the parent in person? And I didn't get a response. But then I'm going to go on. And I'm going to document parent input from the prior psychoed, from the IEPs, from if the teachers can remember a parent-teacher conference. I'll say, hey, you know what, Miss Jones remembered this conversation with the parent, and the parent stated blah, blah, blah. I'm going to have something in that section. If I can't get an SAI teacher to do the academic testing because he or she is just so overwhelmed or disorganized or whatever it is, I'm going to step in and do the academic testing myself. Or I'm going to ask a fellow psych to do it, or I'm going to ask another SAI teacher to do it. It's going to get done, and the report's going to be ready on time. Because it's my fault if it doesn't happen. IEPs that can't be held because a parent can't be bothered to show up, you must document that you offered to hold that IEP over the phone, that the team was willing to come to the home, and the team would even go to the workplace and hold it in the lunchroom if that's what it took. The team was willing to, anything during normalish business hours, Monday through Friday, 7 in the morning to 4 or 5 in the evening. Okay, your unions have teacher contract times. That is not an excuse that that CDE will accept. But that being said, they're not going to ever expect a school district to hold a meeting at 7 p.m. at night because the parent works. They would expect that the school district offer to the parent permission to hold the meeting without them, and then the school psychologist or the SAI teacher will call them at 7 o'clock at night and walk through the IEP and get parent input and perhaps get parent approval. That would be great. That they would expect. So, but that's just, like I said, the law is there to protect parents. IEP meetings. Okay, so some best practices during IEP meetings to prevent a meeting from heading south. Pre-brief your team, all right, on sort of where you're thinking the qualification area might go, how you see services changing or developing. Share a draft of your psychoeducational report. Now, few years ago, probably about 8 years ago, I started doing this. And it has always been my goal to get the IEP draft out 2 weeks before, but at least no later than a week before the IEP meeting, to get the psychoed draft out. And every time I do this, I always put in the email or attach a letter if I'm having to mail it to the parent, asking them for feedback. Parents don't understand most psychoeds. And so they're going to get it, they're going to look at it, they're going to appreciate it, but they're not going to understand it. Some will come with questions because they don't understand standard scores. Some do, and they're going to come with some good questions. Most of the time, in fact, the last couple of years at one of the districts I was working at, a number of times the parents have said, no, this IEP, this psychoed is perfect. I don't need it explained. You can leave the meeting. I mean, my role in an IEP meeting ended about 10 minutes after it started. Not that I ever recommend leaving an IEP meeting early, especially if it's a difficult case. If it's a difficult case, plan 2 to 3 hours for that meeting. Plan to be there for that time. Just keep in mind though, if things get hostile, all right, if things start getting people get heated under the collar, an incomplete meeting is much better than a bad meeting. Okay, so reschedule. Once the meeting has started, that's your date. That's the date of the meeting. If it takes you 3 or 4 months to finish the meeting, you're still within your timeline as long as that initial start date was within the timeline. Okay, so that sort of stops your clock. And that being said, though, you can't hold that meeting and then hold another one 4 months later. That's not reasonable. You're going to have to try to schedule at least every other week another meeting until it's resolved, but you will stay within your timeline. And of course, Covey's, 9 habits or 7 habits of highly effective people? I think it's rule number 5, seek first to understand, then to be understood. That is your golden rule. And he almost got this right on. What Covey should have said is that you seek first to understand, then you convince the other person you do understand, then you make your case. Okay? They must know that you understand from their point of view what's going on. Once they do, they will listen. They will listen to you. And this is true of anybody in any relationship. You're arguing with your spouse. The problem is you haven't understood their side of the story. And if you have, they don't know it. So definitely seek first to understand. Make sure they know you understand because you're demonstrating it. Then give them your side of the story. All right, another area that is probably one of the biggest areas that gets us in trouble is a lack of follow-up. I don't know if follow-up after an IEP meeting is actually required by law. I don't think it is. I know it is best practice, and it's gonna keep you out of the courtroom most of the time. So when we did the presentation on technology, we talked about the easiest automatic way to follow up. It's just to have a templated follow-up email that you can go in and put in a few details into, and then set it up to automatically send out 30 days later. So, or if the parent doesn't have an email address, have that email set up to send to you 30 days later to come back to you. And then hop on the phone. All right. If the parent responds to your email and says things are not working out, you pick up the phone right then. Don't try to resolve it over email. There's no way. Email is best used for delivering good news. If it's not clearly good news, call or talk in person. The rule of thumb with email is that if you read it to yourself sarcastically and it sounds hostile, that's probably the way they're going to read it. So celebrate in email. But if there's a problem, and you can check up on the parent in email, but if there's a problem, give them a phone call. And if there is concerns, hold another IEP meeting. Anybody can call an IEP meeting. Call it. Be that psychologist that the SAI teachers at your school will know that you will hold a meeting every day of the week for the same kid, if that's what it takes to get the services right. Don't be afraid to hold a lot of meetings. And make sure that someone is documenting growth. One of the things that you'll notice with both academic and behavior improvements is that they are too slow for most people. So you get a kid who's having a behavior issue, and the team wants a functional behavior analysis, and you do one, and you create this dynamite behavior intervention plan. Now, let's say this kid is 15 years old. She has been manifesting bad behavior all through middle school. Now we're in high school, and it's just gotten too much. And the team wants that FBA and that BIP, and they get it. And it's spot on. And 1 week later, after they've implemented all your suggestions, she is still having problems getting along with peers in the classroom. You're going to run up against this, because nothing you do will correct 15 years of conditioning overnight. But if you have a tracking mechanism where the teacher is tracking the number of times, and what you want them to track is the number of positive behaviors, not the number of negatives, you will see that the positive behaviors might slowly increase, but they're increasing. And this is the only data you're going to have to sell to the team that this is working. Because although they asked you for a good FBA and BIP, what they really wanted was a miracle. They really wanted you to come in there and snap your fingers 3 times and her behavior would improve and everybody can get on with their life. That's why documenting growth is so important. So on any BIP, give the teacher a way to document the behaviors that you want to see coming. Now, let's talk about one of the big reasons for sort of hostile, difficult cases: advocates. I toyed with the idea of having an advocate join us today, and to be honest with you, I kind of lost track of it. I work with a pretty good advocate. His heart's in the right place. He's not aggressive or hostile, and any time that I have seen a district have to do something they didn't want to do, it was really something they should have done. But in the state of California, what does it take to be an advocate? Nothing. There is no training requirement. There's no experience requirement. You just have to call yourself an advocate. Now, California CDE, California Department of Education, is having a little trouble with the word advocate because attorneys use the word advocate. You might see that the parent has a non-attorney representative. That's an advocate. They're starting to call them non-attorney representative. What is that? NAR, non-attorney representative. I have also seen advocates be called friends of the family, friend of the parent, friend of the student. But an advocate has, there's no level of competency required, no tests they have to take, no forms they have to fill out. They're just an advocate. An advocate and an attorney, the first thing they will do when they come into a case, day number 1, they're going to look at your report and they're going to request an independent educational evaluation. And there's nothing the district can do to deny that. That's going to happen automatically. It doesn't even matter, and in fact, I'm engaged in one right now where the parent is like, the last assessment the district did was spot on. And I'm like, okay, what is it that you want an IE for? What can I help you on? She goes, nothing. The lawyer requested it. So that's good. I don't have to do a lot of work, and I won't charge the district my full amount. But it's just a matter of principle, a matter of procedure. That's what they're going to do. You're going to notice a wide range of a discrepancy of knowledge between your advocates. And chances are, every advocate will know a part of the law in a lot more detail than you do. So it's not always best to argue with them. In fact, it's never best to argue with them. Now, worked with an advocate one time who would sit at the table and quote the law, but reference the code as well. So he'd say, you know, under IDA Section 3, Paragraph 4, subsection A, the law requires da 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 da. And you don't have the law there in front of you, and even if you did, I mean, it's pages long. How would you verify that? But it looked impressive, and it sounded impressive. And he even referenced those codes when he filed with the state for fair hearing. And our attorney looked up those codes, and every one of them was wrong. He was making them up as he went along. Some of them referred to, they were, you know, because of the way the law is laid out, they were all in Ed code. But some would be under lunchroom procedures for, you know, washing your hands. And he's quoting that to say we didn't meet our 60-day timeline. So anyway, that was just his little stint. One of the most powerful weapon that advocates have and that the districts have is to put things in writing. So let's say an advocate wants to request a therapist, an occupational therapist assessment, an OT assessment. The district has the option at the IEP meeting to say yes, and the IEP team agrees and do an OT assessment. But if the district's going to turn them down, well, let's do this. Okay, if the district's going to say no, then what the district will do is respond to that request with a prior written notice. So that means that the decision is not left up to the IEP team. The IEP meeting will close. The district will have, I want to say it's 15 days, to do a prior written notice to provide their answer to the advocate and parent. If a district's going to say no, that's the best way to do it, because they're going to document their reasons. And it's going to be in writing. And it's going to be evidence in court. Now, if at the IEP meeting, the IEP team says no, a good advocate will say, I want a prior written notice rejecting our request for occupational therapy evaluation. And if the district doesn't have a rock solid case, they will overrule the IEP team and provide that OT assessment. So it really works both directions, depending on how strong the evidence is. But regardless of your advocate's area of knowledge or their hostility or their niceness, they're there for a reason. Somewhere along the line, the parent got upset. The parent got upset and something wasn't said right, something wasn't done right, and the advocate convinced them that they needed to come on board. Most districts, almost all districts, especially in Southern California, will not pay advocate fees unless the case actually goes to fair hearing and the judge awards the advocate some money. So these parents are dishing out of their own pocket money for the advocate. I've seen advocates run $150 an hour. And when I say an hour, I mean every time they're in their office making a phone call on behalf of the parent, they're charging the parent at least a percentage of that hourly rate. So these are parents who are desperate that something went wrong. So never just ignore an advocate. There's a reason somebody did something wrong to bring the advocate in. So we talked about why there would be an advocate there. Once an advocate is involved, they become that case becomes your top priority. That case is the one you work on now. That case is the one that starting today, you start scanning in those documents and doing your records review. You start interviewing your teachers. You start reaching out to the parent. Now, the advocate has told the parent, you can't talk to the school district. Well, the advocate can't make the parent not talk to you. And if the parent refuses to talk to you, just notate that. I wouldn't go calling the advocate, but you could. You can call the advocate. I wouldn't try to get input about the student from the advocate, but you could definitely have the advocate explain to you where the breakdown is, what the issues are. Get to know the student, get to know their learning style, their strengths, their likes, their hobbies. Be able to talk about the student in the meeting in a very positive way, but also to address their challenges. Assume there's precipitating factors that cause the advocate to have to get involved. Assume somebody has pissed off the parent, something has gone wrong, and it may not be somebody, it may just be the parent is so frustrated with the kid failing that they have given up on the school system taking the initiative. And so they're going to bring in a friend of the family. And it could really be a friend of the family. Try to talk to the parent directly. And yes, you can. Even the advocate says you can't. Listen, obviously, empathetically. And as you know how to listen. You've been trained how to listen. You've been trained how to paraphrase. Just remember, when you paraphrase something back, you have to paraphrase not only what they said, putting it into your own words, but the feeling that you saw in them when they said it. Or the feeling that you heard if it's a phone interview. Boy, I can tell when you were talking about Johnny's math class, it's like the intensity of your conversation just went really high. You're really frustrated with that math class, and probably that teacher, aren't you? Now they know you understand, and now they'll talk to you. Now, the advocate's going to throw you under the bus as the school psychologist. There's nobody at that table that will be presumed to have more knowledge about interventions and accommodations and student success than the school psychologist, right or wrong. That assumption is going to be made. So you can't take it personally when the advocate tells you what a lousy job you did on that last psychoed and how in the world you could allow these accommodations to go in place, knowing full well, as you knew full well, that they would not work. And you just take a deep breath and realize everybody at the table has been through this before, or most of the time. Most of the time, your director will have been through a meeting like this before. And as a director myself, I can tell you, we do not take advocate evaluations of school psychologists and SAI teachers seriously. We take it with a grain of salt. It's their job to be angry. It's their job to point out failures. It's their job to expect unrealistic expectations. In my book, I put this in there. I will start out each advocate case, represented case, the same way, and wait for the day the parent says, I am so glad we had this talk. I'm going to call the advocate right now and tell him he's fired. I'm perfectly happy with the school psychologist. Guys, it has never happened. I call the parents, I listen, I paraphrase back. We have these wonderful meetings, but I've never heard a parent say that. And usually when the parent fires the advocates, what really happens is the parent runs out of money and stops returning the phone calls from the advocate. That's the only way I've seen them get out of the picture. Once they get into the picture, they stay in. Okay, preparation for your meeting. If you know there's an advocate involved, you know there's an attorney involved, you know it's a difficult case, send those drafts out. Now, what if you haven't gotten parent input and everything else about the psychoed is written? Like we discussed a while ago, do it, but go ahead and send that draft to the parent. Let the parent see that the only thing missing is their input. Go ahead and send it out. When you show up to the meeting, make sure that everyone has plenty of copies of everything. If the teacher's going to reference a work sample, there better be 7 copies of that work sample if there's going to be 6 people at that meeting. Everything you have plenty of copies of. And you're going to want to use and stick to an agenda. There's a couple of good agendas out there. I've got some on my website, but they're all basically the same thing. Stick to it. The advocate will try to derail it. The advocate's job is to keep everything focused on what the child is not able to do and what the school is not doing. And so a good agenda will have a parking lot. In fact, I think we're going to talk about this later on, but in case not, a parking lot is a place where you put those topics that the advocate brings up or the attorney brings up or the parent brings up that we're not ready to talk about in the agenda yet. So you make a note about it, you put it in the parking lot, and you get to it later on. Or you don't ever get to it because the meeting has moved on and progressed and that's no longer an issue. But that's a good trick to stay on top of, to keep the agenda going. You know, I have Googled advocates in the past, looked up their names. I don't go to their website because that's just going to be propaganda. But news articles about an advocate can be informative sometimes. It's not a lot of help. It might give you some indication as to what you're in for. And sometimes it can be humorous, and you can have a little note card that reminds you about some funny or you know, unfortunate, I don't know, something you read in the news. That's okay. If you want to do that, that's fine. I've never found it to be much help. You should, though, pre-brief your IEP team. So if you have worked with this advocate before, or you know a colleague who's worked with them before, now talk to that colleague. Find out how it went. Find out what they're looking for. Find out the advocate's area of strength or knowledge in the IEP law. What are they going to focus on? And I was working with advocates, not too long ago. What was it he brought up? Something that was in the law that I had no idea until I went back and looked it up. Let's see if it comes to me in a minute. But anyway, the main thing you want to talk to your team about is what not to say, right? We talked about not using the word lazy or unmotivated. So talk to them about describing the behavior, not labeling it. Ask your teachers, if they're asked by an advocate, do you think Johnny needs a one-on-one in your classroom? How does a teacher answer that question? Without saying, at best, your teacher's going to say, a one-on-one would help any student in that classroom. Do know that if a teacher says something like that, if a teacher says, if an advocate asks, does Jill need a one-on-one in your classroom, and the teacher says, heck yeah, I've never known a student who needed a one-on-one more than Jill needed it. That's going to be hard to walk back from, but it's not a commitment of services by the district. If the teacher says, I really think Jill needs to go to the doctor and have an MRI done, you may have heard the rumor that means now the district has to pay for it, and that's just not true. Teachers and parents and administrators, let me roll that back a little bit. Teachers and parents and psychologists, the janitorial staff, if you have them at the meeting, the front office secretary, if you have him or her at the meeting, they can say anything they want to. If it's not a part of the offer of FAPE, the school's not mandated to provide it. Unless the advocate can absolutely prove that it is essential to the child's education benefit, and if it is, the team will realize it and should be offering it. So don't beat a teacher over the head if they're just being honest, and they really need extra help in the classroom. A lot of times that's what teachers see that one-on-one as, their little extra help in the classroom. The administrator is the one that's going to make the offer of FAPE. They're the one that's going to be responsible for the offer of FAPE. So the administrator needs to know and needs to take the advice of the whole team and make the right offer of FAPE, but needs to consider every option. Keep your director informed when there's an advocate involved in a meeting. Keep a contact log of everyone you talk to regarding that meeting. your program specialist, when you called your program specialist to find out what the options were in the district, when you called the child's medical doctor or therapist and you got input, when you talked to the counselor, school counselor about the child, keep all that. Keep an activities log. This is what you did, stuff you did to produce the IEP and to produce the psychoeducational report. So on Monday, I gathered all the information from CUME, scanned it in, ran OCR. On Wednesday, I was able to do some word searching, just keep all of that and keep everybody informed along the way. One of the things that I do as an IEE is that when I get a new case, I take and put all the teachers' name, email addresses into a contact list, the director of special education, the school psychologist, the advocate, and anybody else that has anything to do with that case. I put them all into a group, a contact group. And if I'm mailing out a questionnaire to the teachers, it goes to the whole group. If I'm mailing out a questionnaire to the parent, it goes to the whole group. If I'm asking the district for some additional clarification on something, it goes to the whole group. So the whole group knows everything that's going on at the same time. Now, you may not want to do that if you're working for a public school district. You may not want to be quite that transparent. But I think in an independent educational evaluation, I need to be perfectly transparent, and everyone needs to know and have the opportunity to weigh in on every question and know where we're at in the process. So definitely keep the lines of communication open as you develop that psychoed, as you prepare for the IEP meeting. There'll be less surprises. Now guys, the IEP can be released to the parent in a draft format. That's best practice. A lot of times your SAI teachers won't have it ready in time, but that doesn't mean you can't jump in and help them get it ready and get it to the parent and to the advocate and to your director and to your principal a week ahead of time and get input from everybody on it. Just make sure it says draft and you're fine. What is an IEE? Okay, so we talked about the fact that advocates and attorneys will always request it. And just right now, just operate on the assumption that there is no way to deny an IEE. And the reason there's no way to deny it is because you have to take the parent to due process in order to do it. And at that due process, you must prove, the district must prove that your psychoed is perfect and that there is absolutely nothing the parent could disagree with. But remember, this is a law written for parents. And the law says that a parent can disagree with the district assessment and that the parent does not have to tell the district why they disagree. What? Well, the courts believe that the parents are not educational experts. So therefore, they might not be able to articulate why they disagree. So they don't have to. I've known, in 17 years, I've only seen a district, and it was a district I worked for, take a parent to court once. And that's because the parent abused the IEE requests. They had requested it 3 years ago. The next year, they requested an updated psychoeducational report to be conducted. The next year. And we did. And then they requested an IEE. And they did the same thing the next year. By the third year, the district had had enough. And we lost that case. So the parents still got their IEE. There's just no way to do it. And the funny thing is, the IEEs cost about $4,500. To take a parent to court cost $20,000. So it was a lose-lose for us. All right, if you know an IEE is being conducted and you know that you did a pretty good psychoed, maybe you did a great psychoed, maybe you were in a rush and you just did sort of an average psychoed. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. A good IEE isn't going to pick apart your psychoed. Now, some of them might, but I want you to be prepared to learn something when you get that independent educational evaluation. I do. After 17 years, Gun Psychological Services out of Orange County, his reports are short, but I always learn something when I'm reading them. There's a okay. There is one IEE provider in Palm Desert that you will not learn anything from. But otherwise, most of the time, I've stolen some of my best material that I use in my template from IEEs that were conducted following my assessments. You know yourself that you have to consider the results. The team must consider the IEE results. They don't have to agree with it, but they must consider it. I was going to say something else, but I've lost track of that. Okay, so since an IEE doesn't have to be justified to be requested, don't give them any reason to justify one. Okay? By and large, the number one reason parents don't like a district's report is because they feel that it lacked a significant source that supported their opinion. So if you know the child has an outside therapist, Dr. Crazy, and a psychologist, Miss Talk a Lot or Dr. Talk a Lot, and you have no respect or you don't think they're very competent, so you don't want to put their stuff in your report. Now, do it. Put it in there, okay? Show the parent you did consider every source of information. Inconclusive findings, you don't write a psychoed report that comes out saying the student may qualify for ED, but I'm just not sure. It's your job to be certain. It's your job to at least act like you're certain and to be able to justify that certainty. Of course, if there's no parent information in your psychoeducational report, it is completely indefensible and you're going to have an IE conducted. If there's no classroom observation, guys, this is the easiest one. I don't see it as much anymore. In fact, there's two on here that I used to see a lot. Classroom observation, I could just about rely on if I was getting an IE request from a district and I looked at the psychoed that they had done, there would be no classroom observation on there. The attorneys and the advocates were jumping all over that. They've gotten better. Districts have started taking that very seriously, and you almost never see that. Now I want to skip down to the last one because this one I still see, but not as often, and that's the dates. Oh my gosh, how many times did I find a date in an IEP, and I go to my calendar, and that was on a Saturday, or it was Christmas, or it was over a school holiday. It was impossible that the kid was assessed on that date. And I remember one time in Temecula, I was working a case, and I said, "Did you take her in on a Saturday to be evaluated by the school psychologist? And if you did, what was that like?" And the parent says, "No, we've never taken our child in on a Saturday. What are you talking about?" But that's the date they had given. Failure to assess in all areas of suspected disability. Okay, this is another big one. You might as well, if it's a difficult case, take out the word suspected. I mean, in the law, that's what it says. And by the letter of the law, if you don't have a reason to assess for OHI, don't. That's what the law says. But you better have no reason at all, okay? And the reason could be, like we talked about earlier, a CAS attention scale score that is below 90. Okay, don't even go with that argument that you consider 85 to be average, and you might, and the district might, but it's below 90, okay? You're probably looking, you're not probably looking, you need to assess for the possibility of attention deficit or attention processing. If there's even a possibility, and a good psychoeducational assessment is going to consider most of the time SLD, OHI, ED, ID. It might even rule out autism if there's any signs of autistic behaviors. Couple of things. One, that's why I like to use the brief, the Behavior Rating Inventory of Executive Functioning, because it has an autistic scale on there. And if that comes back as no and there's no other indications, I can justify not assessing it for autism. there's a number of areas that you would never assess in anyway, like deaf and hard of hearing, those kind of areas, speech and language. But now if you're sitting in your meeting with the child and you're having trouble understanding them, you best recommend that your speech and language pathologist jump in and at least do a quick screening and then get an assessment plan signed and let them do an assessment. So go ahead and assess in all areas of disability. It's not that hard to do, and if you use your tests right, they will overlap for you. And the IE must be considered. Now, we talk about IEs, and many of you have probably seen an independent educational evaluation. But how do they differ from your reports? Number one, that IE provider is probably making $4,000 on this IE. So he or she's going to take the time to dig a little deeper, to give assessments that go more in depth than you could possibly have the time to do. You've got 60, 70, 90, 100 cases to do this year. And you notice that Jill was showing slight memory issues on the taps, but you don't have time to go back and you do a ramble because the IEP meeting is tomorrow, and well, it was just an 85 on the taps word recall or something, and you're not going to pursue that. You know that it's really her attention processing, blah blah blah. They're going to pursue it. They're going to dig down. They're going to find out why that 89 wasn't a 90. They're going to find out where that memory issue delay is. The reports will be longer. You would think they got paid by the page. I think the longest one I ever seen was 120 pages. And it literally had verbatim in there the whole conversation during the testing administration. It was just unbelievable. I think this lady has a secretary that does nothing but transcribes recordings. It's going to have a lot of supporting evidence. A good IE is not going to make a case unless it can overwhelm the team with evidence. They're going to have some very specific and targeted recommendations. And this is something we should all do in all of our reports anyway. But they're going to come in typically with some spot-on recommendations, irregardless of the district's ability or history in implementing it. And this is where you have the opportunity to help your district step up. Well, not you yourself, but the district will step up and most of the time provide these services, and all of a sudden they're taking their services to the next level. So by and large, it's a good growth process for everyone. Most of the providers of IEs are an expert in the field in which they're brought in to do. So, like for me, for example, if a district is struggling with a kid who might be dyslexic, okay, they know that I'm going to assess thoroughly in that area. That's one of my areas of expertise. That and ED, I made those two quite some time ago, and attention deficit. So you too, definitely develop your area of expertise and do that now as interns. Get your area of expertise out there, get it documented so that when you sit in for that interview, you can work that into the interview. I've worked for the past 2 years on really, you might say during the interview, I've worked for the past 2 years on really understanding ED, on really understanding emotionally disturbed kids, what that looks like, how to diagnose for it, how to provide interventions. Because the people sitting across the table from you at that interview, it's going to be like, they're going to be in their mind thinking, I know the exact school I need her at. I know the exact kids I need her to work with. And now they have made your interview relevant, and they're not going to forget you. An IE that document and that provider, whoever it is, will be ready for a fair hearing. I've never written an IE report that I didn't assume would go to fair hearing. So it's been proved a couple of times. If there's any ambiguity in there, if there's any doubt that a score might be off, it's reassessed, it's validated. I'm ready to defend it in a court of law. So assume that they are too. All right, let's talk about the IEP meeting. for difficult cases. And here I just say lead with care, and I mean that. You may not always lead IEP meetings, but I would suggest after probably your first or second year that if an advocate's involved, you might want to take the lead, or at least talk to your SAI teacher or your administrator or whoever typically leads your meetings about these issues. One, control your body language. You might feel nervous, you might feel angry, hurt, or embarrassed. The first way you're going to show that is through your voice. So even before we talk body language, let's talk about voice. Tone, volume, and cadence. Okay? Keep that tone right. Don't go for that sarcastic tone. Don't let the tonation of the voice rise, because when we get angry or afraid, we talk louder and higher. Okay? Keep total voice control, tone, volume, and cadence. The volume needs to stay appropriate to the room, and the cadence needs to stay nice and slow, calm. When we get angry or afraid, our cadence gets fast, our volume gets loud, and our tone gets high, and everybody in the room knows we're uncomfortable. Take a deep breath, maintain total voice control, and that will help to relax the body. Okay. Stay calm, always stay calm. Have an agenda, and fly the child. Okay, so when I learned how to fly a few years ago, the instructor would always remind me to fly the plane. If my door came open one time, and he's like, I'm fiddling with the door. In the meantime, the plane is in a bank. He's like, Jerry, you forgot to fly the plane. Fly the plane. If the radio stopped working, fly the plane. If the altimeter light comes on, fly the plane. If you fly into a cloud, you can't see where you're going, fly the plane. Fly the plane. Well, take that mentality to the IEP meeting and fly the child. If the advocate starts telling the SAI teacher what a crappy job she's doing, bring it back to the child. Well, let's talk about the exact services that Jill really needs in class, and let's talk about ways that we can provide those. Keep it on Jill. Keep it on Jill. Don't let the advocate derail by talking about the parent and how many hours they spend crying because, well, let's talk about how we can help Jill to be successful so the parent is happy. And let's talk about Jill. Let's talk about Jill. Fly the child. Okay. Let everyone know what the goal is for the IEP meeting, and that is to help the child. Right? That is to stay focused on the child. Make sure that everyone has the opportunity to be heard and that everyone knows they were heard and understood. They know that. Then move on. It's okay to say no at an IEP meeting. It's okay for the parent or the advocate to request something that is not right and you to simply say no. That would not be appropriate at this stage. As the school psychologist, you may have to offer your opinion. And you can say, in my opinion, I do not like that intervention. And here's why. And of course, we talked about the parking lot, a very useful tool for delaying those comments and agenda items or topics that the advocates want that will get you off task. Okay, make sure that you understand the parent's frustration, that you understand the advocate. Sometimes we presume what the advocate's going to say and we don't really understand it, and it's going to upset them. Target enthusiasm. So one of the things that we used to do at one of the districts I worked with is we would take, and when the parent would say something at a meeting when there was an advocate, the SAI teacher and I would be like, that's an amazing idea. I never thought about that. And then the advocate would say something and we'd be like, okay, got it. And our enthusiasm would always be toward the parent. Anytime the parent spoke, and before the end of the meeting, the parent was speaking. The advocate was actually being quiet. And the advocate had started the meeting off by saying, I will speak on behalf of the parent. So that's what I mean by waiting or weighted parent input. definitely act as if anything the parent says is way more important than anything anybody else says. As the IEP meeting progresses, these will be 2-3 hour long meetings. Periodically stop and offer a summary as to where we're at. And if you see things getting off track, stop and offer a summary. It's a perfect way to get everybody refocused on the IEP and keep it moving. Just like in this presentation, occasionally I've went down some rabbit holes. And luckily I've got the PowerPoint here in front of me to help provide a summary of where we're at right now. But you would do the same thing. The advocate gets really upset telling you the story of the time that they had this kid that with a similar situation and blah 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 blah, and you can say, well, let's summarize where we're at right now with this student. And so far we have agreed to this, and this, and we're currently working on this new goal. All right, that's where we are. Let's move forward. Stay concrete. Okay, so advocates are going to want to say things like, Johnny is not doing any work in class. Okay, that's a generalization unless it's absolutely true. So let's go to the teacher. Teacher, are you seeing any work from Johnny? Well, yes, he will get these 3. He'll usually do 3 of the 10 problems, and then he's just tired. He just stops. Okay, so Johnny's doing 3 of the 10 problems. See how much more concrete that is, and he's just not doing any work. An advocate might, you would. That's why you would never use the word lazy or unmotivated. Those are not concrete subjects. They're subjective. Avoid labels. Okay, avoid labeling the child as anything until the team agrees on the classification. So avoid generalizations. We talked about that. Assume a 2-hour meeting. Clear your calendar for the rest of the day. Sound bites. Okay. Teach your teachers to speak in short, to-the-point statements, to avoid those long run-on monologues. The long-winded statement is a common opening tactic by advocates, especially, and it's used by anybody who feels they have a weak case. If I can't support what I'm about to say or what I just said, I'm going to throw out a lot of BS. In hopes of convincing you. You know those teachers who speak in sentences. You know those teachers who speak in paragraphs. And you know those teachers who speak in entire novels. They just can't say something succinctly. Try to work with them a little bit, and you know what you're going to have to do is you're going to talk about sound bites with the teacher, and then you know the teachers I'm talking about, so you're going to maybe give that teacher a little nonverbal sign. Listen, I'm going to have to keep this meeting going. If you see me doing this, that means I need you to sort of wrap it up so that we can move on to something else. I'm not insulting you, and we really appreciate your opinion, but I've got I've got a couple strategies I got to work out. Whatever it takes, whatever nonverbal you want to use to keep the teacher's input short and succinct. The longer that input is, the greater the chance they're going to say something that the advocate's going to lock onto, and you're going to lose the meeting. You're going to lose control of it. I like making an opening and a closing statement. I like to open the meeting with our agenda, with our purpose, with something positive about the student, with our goal of what we want to accomplish, the IEP document we want to develop, the IE that we want to review, and how much we're looking forward to learning. And then I want to close my IEP with a closing statement, thanking everybody for their input, for their time, for helping us to help Johnny make growth in his education, and just sort of to sort of tie it together. It's totally up to you. And I don't do this with every IEP meeting, but I like it when there's an advocate or an attorney involved. And thank the advocate, thank the attorney, if for nothing else, for giving you a reason to step your game up one more time. And I don't mean that as an insult. We're all going to be so busy that we're going to do B+ psychoed sometimes. But when you know there's an advocate or attorney, you're going to do it A++++ psychoed. And you're going to learn a lot from that. Your psychoeducational report then. Let's talk about it. First of all, I hope every psychoeducational report you ever do is legally compliant. But like I just said, you're going to be extra motivated to get these right. So celebrate them. Make sure you're assessing in all areas of suspected disability. If you're not assessing for a disability, make sure you can prove that you don't need to. Otherwise, just assess for it. Okay? And you guys know that in your psychoed, if you don't assess for autism at all, in the summary section, you cannot say the child does not qualify for autism. Okay? You cannot say the child doesn't qualify for an area you did not specifically assess for, somehow, some way. Now, you have been doing this job for months now, and you know what autism looks like, and you know Johnny's not autistic, so you go ahead and rule it out without doing an assessment. Nope, can't do that. Can't do that. At least give the brief, at least give some sort of survey that rules out autism. Otherwise, do not put in your report that the child doesn't qualify. That will just be an area you did not assess. You assessed in SLD and OHI. Then you can say the child qualifies or does not qualify for SLD or OHI. If you don't assess for ED, don't rule that out. Make sure you have classroom observations with the S. Let's put the S on there. That's what I was trying to emphasize. That didn't come out very good. Okay, so classroom observations. More than one. One's what's required. But not only more than one, make sure the observation is in the area where there is a need. So if you're looking at an ED kid, you probably want to do a playground observation and a classroom observation. If you're looking at maybe a conduct disorder kid, or you got conduct disorder, ED, OHI, you're assessing all these different areas, you want to rule out conduct, you're probably going to need a lunchroom observation, a PE observation, a recess observation, and a classroom observation. I don't care what you're assessing for, you're going to need a classroom observation. But chances are you may need an observation in some other area. Make sure you get parent and teacher input. Both parents. So if you got divorced parents, stay on those parents until you get input from both of them. And all of the teachers. How many teachers are required for middle school and high school students, psychoed, to be legally compliant? 1. But that opens the door too for an independent educational evaluation and an angry parent, because you didn't get input from the one teacher that he really struggles with. And the reason you didn't get that teacher's input was because she struggles too as a teacher, and doesn't do any reports or anything at all. So, all right, last thing before you send off that psychoed, make sure you know the gender of the child and search for the pronouns. So if it's a male, search for she or her in your report. Now, when it comes to a when it comes to a psychoed like this, I will go through my report and even remove all the his/hers that occur sometimes when you're copying and pasting from different templates or from different report writing software. So if it is a male student, I'll change it he/she to simply say he throughout my whole report. I remove any doubt, any reference to the other pronoun. And my God, make sure you're using the correct name and that it's spelled correctly every single time it appears. Autocorrect is not your friend when it comes to names. I did have that happen to me one time on the student interview section of my report. Autocorrect had changed his name to something else. And sure enough, the school psychologist asked me who I was talking about in that section. Okay, so your bottom line is that with perfect knowledge comes perfect understanding. A perfect psychoeducational report would provide perfect understanding, which would cause you to be able to provide perfect interventions and the perfect accommodations. You will never have perfect knowledge. You'll never test the kid enough. You will never know all the precipitating factors that might be playing into their learning. So don't beat yourself up and don't get caught in this analysis paralysis. All right? You've got to call it at some point. And that's why I say use the goal of getting that psychoed draft out 2 weeks early. Call that your deadline and take the data that you've been able to assimilate and call it quits. That's as good as you can do until you start getting feedback over the next 2 weeks from these people that you sent the draft out to. All right, so what does the process look like when we get lawyers involved? When we get a really upset parent? When we get a lot of disagreement going on? You've got 3 levels that's going to happen. The first is alternative dispute resolution, ADR. You would call an ADR, typically they're called by the district, when the parent disagrees with the offer of FAPE. Okay, so the district makes an offer of FAPE. We're going to give Jill 3 hours of SAI time a week. The parent wants a one-on-one, 8 hours a day. The district says no, the parent's upset, they don't sign the IEP. Right there, you've got about 5 days to hold an alternative dispute resolution. And so you contact the SELPA representative. Most districts, that's who's going to run it. And the director of special education, the program specialist, the SELPA representative, the parents, the IEP team, the rest of the IEP team will all get together and try to work on a compromise, try to come to an understanding. Now, there's typically no lawyers involved in this level, almost never. But the rule of thumb is, in all of these, if the parent brings a lawyer, the district brings a lawyer. If the parent does not bring a lawyer, the district does not bring a lawyer. If the parent does not record, the district will not record the meeting. By the way, you know that if a parent wants to record an IEP meeting, they can. The law does require the district to have 24 hours notice before a parent can do that. But it doesn't specify how that notice is to be delivered. So if the parent faxes a notice saying that they're going to record the meeting and they fax it to, I don't know, the kitchen staff, then the district's gotten notice. Now, the kitchen staff may not know what this is, may not know who to send it to, and it may get routed to you a month later, and the parent says, no, I gave you notice. Guys, the bottom line is if a parent wants to walk in and record it, it's no big deal anymore. It used to be a big deal, and the reason that 24 hours is there was literally so we could get a hold of a tape recorder. That's why. But now we all walk around with tape recorders and video recorders in our phones, in our pockets. So if that happens, just pull out your phone and start recording right along with the parent. I have never known these recordings to ever be used, other than the fact it keeps us all on our toes. I've never known a parent to go back and use them. Maybe some of you have, but I've never seen it. All right, so the ADR fails. Now we're looking at a mediation meeting. If a district or a parent decides to sue each other, California Department of Education is going to encourage the district to request a mediation meeting prior to going to court, prior to going to the Office of Administrative Hearing. Okay. Mediation means that a mediator comes down, and the mediator hears both sides of the argument. Again, if the parents bring a lawyer, district will bring a lawyer. Typically, lawyers are not brought in at this stage. It's a non-binding mediation, meaning that the parent can walk out of there saying they agree and turn around and file again the very next day. It's the last step before Office of Administrative Hearing, before the courtroom, which when it goes to the courtroom, you're almost guaranteed that you're going to break that district-parent relationship. It's going to be pretty much hostile from then forward. If the parent wins, the parent's going to believe that they know their job and their child and your job better than you do. If the parent loses, they're going to hold a grudge against you. It's this mediation meeting it's an optional step, so the parent might not even agree to mediation. That's not going to look good when it goes to court. The district will always agree to mediation, and the district will always want to do this first. This is also a lot cheaper. The mediation is also a way that the district and the parent can avoid, say, taking responsibility or admitting guilt. Okay, the mediator is going to try to reach a compromise between the two parties that both parties can live with. And when you go to one of these meetings, bring your paper trail. Bring all the documents that you've scanned in from the CUME and from the special ed file. Bring all of your protocols, your assessment protocols. Bring your psycho-ed report. Bring your log of the number of times you contacted the parents, the activities you have done on this case, the notes from the IEP meetings. Bring all that with you. It just will help you to provide some evidence to the hearing officer, the mediator. Well, I think this is probably the more appropriate term. Some good hard evidence and some concrete examples of what you've done to support the district and support the child. Stay specific and objective. So don't get wrapped up in these generalities that will be used by the other side. Like you would never use a label like lazy, but you would describe the behavior in a very concrete, specific, and objective way. So prepare, take your time, plan on taking an entire day to review all the documents and prepare for the mediation meeting. Take notes on what information you can find on what pages. Then try to relax and present your information at the meeting. Guys, if you're nervous, you know what's going to happen, okay? You guys have all sat through high stakes tests in a classroom, and there's those few questions you just weren't sure about. You knew it, but you couldn't find the right answer until you turned the test in and stepped out the door. And as soon as you stepped out the classroom door, you're like, oh man, it was C. I knew that one. And the reason you didn't know it at the test is because you were anxious. And when we get anxious, our minds reduce access to long-term memory. So stay relaxed and present. Just present your side of the story. There's going to be no winners in a mediation meeting or a fair hearing meeting. There's going to be no winners, only losers. At a fair hearing meeting, there will be lawyers. You will be in a courtroom. You will be sworn in. You'll get up there into that little testimony box, and everybody's going to be looking at you, and you're going to be sweating, and oh my God. Okay, the judge, a good judge, and by and large, the times that I have presented at a fair hearing, the judges have been very supportive. They know you're nervous. They know you're not a lawyer. You're not a professional person to give testimony. I found them to be very reasonable and supporting and caring. It's very costly. It will cost the district, like I said, about $20,000 to enter that classroom. Now, if the district loses, or any part that the district loses, they will have to cover the parent's cost for that part. So if the parent is bringing up 10 issues and they only win 3 issues, then the district must pay 3/10 of all fees that their lawyer puts forth, including anything they want to ask for the advocate. Update your curriculum vitae before you go to that meeting. A curriculum vitae is your resume on steroids. This is your resume, but it lists every professional development class you've ever went to, every online symposium you've ever attended, every book you've ever read on the topic. It's 5-6 pages long. It makes you look like a hero. The opposing side, the parent side, they'll bring in experts, and the judge is going to take their curriculum vitae in one hand and yours in the other, and whoever weighs the most, well, that's the expert he's going to listen to, or she. I'm kidding, it doesn't really work that way, but definitely update your curriculum vitae. Answer only the question. Your attorney will prep you for this, your district attorney. You'll spend 6-8 hours with the attorney learning how to testify. And you've probably heard it, the attorney asks you, what time is it? and you say, oh, it's 11:55, you didn't answer the question. No, wait. Well, how's that go? I got that wrong. The attorney will ask you, do you know what time it is? And you'll say it's 11:55, and the attorney will be disappointed because the correct answer to do you know what time it is yes. And that's all. So that's the way they're going to want you to answer the question. You're going to want to support your side of the argument. So you're going to want to provide additional data when you answer those questions and demonstrate your knowledge and demonstrate your expertise. Don't. Because the attorneys have a long-term plan, and they're going to circle back around and get the information they need from you in the order they need it so it makes sense. Know your report. Reread that report the morning of the meeting. Highlight. Do whatever you got to do. But make sure you know what's in that report. Make sure you understand the student's last IEP and can support it or not. If you didn't support that intervention, be able to talk about that. You're not going to throw the district under the bus. You didn't make the offer of FAPE. The principal did, and they probably did with a good heart and using all the knowledge and information they had. But the attorney will also prepare you for that. If there's going to be some areas where it looks like you and the district are going to disagree, the attorney will tell you how to handle that. And you be upfront with your attorney and say, listen, I was at that IEP meeting and I do not agree with these accommodations. And I made it clear at the meeting, but I was overruled. The attorney needs to know that. Preparing for fair hearings, mediations, even alternative dispute resolutions should take you hours. This is not something you do just a few minutes before the meeting. Don't do that. You'll go in so ill-prepared. You'll be nervous and you won't do well. Relax at a fair hearing meeting and answer the questions that's asked. So, how to help you relax? I want to end with this. The outcome of any of these is usually additional services for the child. That's usually the number one thing that comes out of it. It might, how does it affect you? It might mean that you've got to start counseling this kid once a week or something. Typically, it means that the SEI teacher is providing more targeted and more services. You're always going to learn something new from every one of these. So be prepared for that and don't miss this opportunity to learn something new. You're going to learn what not to do. You're going to learn what to do next time. You're just going to learn something new. Sometimes the officer will require further training, that the district conduct further training, and that means that you got to attend some classes, go to a conference, document some reading that you've done, however the district decides to implement the training. Very, very rarely will a psychologist be reprimanded because of the outcome of one of these meetings. And when they are, they deserved it. They knew this was a difficult case. They knew they had not assessed the child. They had not administered the CAS, but they reported scores anyway. They lied in their psychoeducational report. That psychologist deserves a reprimand. But that's what you got to do for that to be the consequence. Because everybody's going to, the judge, the mediator, the CELPA personnel are going to assume that everybody's coming into this in good faith and that nobody had the intention of harming the child. But there's a misunderstanding. There's a misunderstanding. So as long as you are not intentionally betraying the child, you have nothing to worry about. As far as a reprimand. All right, let me stop the recording.